Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's session of the SparkUp Entrepreneur Series. My name is Tiago Arnaiz, and today's topic is future-proofing, thriving amidst crisis. So in order to meet the unique and pressing challenges of today, businesses need to look to the future for solutions. And who better to learn from than the very firms building that future? Surveying the business community, we found some groups more ready than others to tackle operations through COVID-19 and act on the opportunities that it's created. Today, we'll be asking some of these firms, what makes them so resilient? How might other firms adapt some of their best practices? And how can one position their business to not just survive, but thrive through the current crisis? Joining us today are some familiar faces to the SparkUp community, as well as some new faces we're very excited to have on board. I'll be introducing each of our guests in turn, inviting them to share a quick insight on what they believe is the biggest challenge facing innovative startup enterprises today. First up, very excited to have Lope Doromal Jr., Chief Technology Officer of IBM Philippines. Over his 20-year career with IBM, Lope has been at the forefront of nearly every technological trend that shaped not only how businesses, but people interact with the world around us. He began his journey as an e-business specialist in the late 90s, where he served as a lead advocate for IBM, focusing on advising the firm on how best to find economic value in a then fledgling technology called the internet. He led the analytics-driven Smarter Planet campaign in the late 2000s, where as chief technologist, he helped organizations understand how an instrumented, interconnected, and intelligent world changes the way we understand and react to our environment. Today, he serves as IBM's Chief Technology Officer, where he leads the company's campaign around the cloud and cognitive technologies. Concurrently, he is also a client technical advisor for the banking and financial markets, providing expert vendor-neutral advice and solution strategies to address their clients' needs. Lope, always a pleasure to have you join us. In your opinion, what is the biggest challenge facing innovative young enterprises today?
Thank you, Tiago, and good morning to you. Good morning to my fellow panelists, and good morning to our viewers. So I think everyone agrees that what happened, throughout the world in the past 3 months is probably unprecedented, right? Even the largest companies probably in their disaster planning has not anticipated an event like this, right? So the biggest challenge, I think, for organizations large and small today is just the uncertainty that's facing everyone, right? All of the business planning, all of the analytics, all of the models that we have made in the past years with regards to scenarios, how consumers will react, how our systems will perform, how our partners will be able to deliver, all of that probably goes out of the window today, right? All of us have seen that meme that says, what's the biggest driver for digital transformation? Is it the CEO? Is it the CIO? Or is it COVID-19, right? So I think that is the silver lining in all of this today, right? I think this provides opportunities for organization to really transform and to really adapt to this current situation, because I'm sure this is not the end of this, right? Similar situations will probably happen in the future, because you remember SARS before and now we have COVID and so on, right? So I think it's important for every organization to understand where they sit today, what they need to do to be able to adapt to this new normal.
Thank you very much for that, Lope. Next on our panel, we have Roland Ross, founder of Kumu. For those who have somehow still not heard of this massively popular platform, Kumu is a live streaming app with over 4 million users, largely Gen Z and millennial Filipinos spread across over 50 countries. Since its launch in 2018, Kumu has become the #1 grossing social app in the Philippines, number 10 in Canada, and placing among the top 25 in markets like Saudi Arabia, Italy, Hong Kong, Kuwait, and Australia. Prior to Kumu, Roland built a career as a growth engineer with a track record generating millions of customers for Fortune 500 and high growth tech companies in the United States. Roland, great to see you again. Thank you for joining us. As a founder yourself, what do you believe is the biggest challenge facing innovative startups today?
I think really the biggest challenge, I always tell people to look at the Sequoia COVID Black Swan article, and it talks about the biggest challenges, because COVID has really developed a drop in business activity, supply chain disruptions, and all sorts of really challenges in travel and things like that. So really the 6 fundamentals that a startup enterprise needs to look at really basically recommending that you actually challenge these. Every assumption is number one, cash runway, two, fundraising, three, your sales forecast, four, marketing, five, headcount, and six, capital spending. I think these are the six core essentials that a startup needs to do. Like, for example, a cash runway, do you really have as much runway as you think? And if you look at fundraising, it's going to be a lot harder because when talking to venture capitalists and investors, they're going to be a lot more picky. So you have to make sure that you're in constant communication of your investors and potential investors. Sales forecasts and marketing have taken a huge hit, and you need to really take a look at those forecasts and be very, very realistic. And number 5 and 6, when you look at capital spending and headcount, I always stress to people basically this whole concept of how do we do more with less? And then how do we raise our productivity? And specifically, I mean, long story short, I strongly suggest to really focus on those 6 key areas specifically now.
I'd love to expand on those 6 key areas later on in the panel conversation. But let's jump into introducing our third panelist today, Miko David. He is the co-founder of digital strategy consulting firm David and Goliath. So David Goliath, a digital strategy consulting firm, specializes in data analytics, strategy formulation, and digital implementation. Before its founding, Miko was the marketing communication director and head of digital for Globe Telecom's small and medium business group, where he oversaw branding, performance marketing initiatives, social media activities, as well as data collection and attribution. Before Globe, he lived and worked in Madrid, Spain, where he served as the global new business HQ of Havas Media, one of the world's largest communication firms, overseeing implementations across 130 markets. He also spent time in the regional office in Singapore, where he served as senior digital manager, leading digital campaigns for several markets. Miko, thank you for joining us today. You have the floor.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you, and good morning to everyone. We are in very interesting times, but I think there's also a lot of very interesting opportunities. I know it's a lot of gloom and doom projections, no, but I'm an optimist. And for me, whenever we monitor different things across different markets, across different companies competing in a space, we see some shifts. And these shifts are usually opportunities for startups or companies to actually leverage on. There's been a lot of changes with regard to marketing plans, sales forecasts, no, as Roland mentioned. But at the same time, not everyone is very organized, especially the large companies, no, to really be able to leverage on these new opportunities. And I think the leaner, more agile companies will have the great opportunities to capture market share. It's interesting. I've seen things from the meat industry, or let's say in online delivery services, to other services. It's just amazing that what you could do if you just see the information and how everyone moves in relation to one another. So today I'd be happy to share what I've seen so far, and of course what could be good tips for people trying to navigate through these times.
Miko, I know you did some market research for the session today, so I'd love to dive into that later as well. Rounding out our group today is the co-founder and business development head of Bukid Fresh, Gorby de Malanta. Gorby started Bukid Fresh, a digital platform providing healthy, traceable, and sustainably grown food, following his observation that our nation's farmers are consistently among the poorest sectors in the country. Leveraging his experience in commodities trading and business, he wanted to help farmers increase their profits, while also extending the joy of farm fresh produce to consumers across the Philippines. So Bukid Fresh was born with the mission of connecting consumers directly with their local farmers. Gorby, thank you for joining us today. As a founder yourself, what do you believe is the biggest challenge facing startups today?
Again, good morning, everyone. I'm Gorby of Bukid Fresh. So thank you for that introduction, Tiago. Just to add on to what we're doing, what we do is we help our partner producers market their produce prior to actual harvest. So it's actually a pre-selling initiative, and we're able to disrupt the traders' systematic ways of dictating low prices to the farmers due to the so-called supply and demand situation. And currently, we've been able to connect 1,800 customers to more than 60 of our partner farmers, and that's about 50 tons of fresh produce that's sustainably sourced. So yeah, going back to your question, I would have to say that the biggest challenge for startups now is that the Philippine market had their disposable income lowered significantly. So for startups serving the retail segment or B2C, it would have been particularly tricky to market their products or services to a customer base which had their purchase patterns drastically changed as they look to serve their physiological needs first. On the other hand, for startups serving businesses not in the food or utilities sector, this could have caused a cash flow problem on their end as the sales of their enterprise customers definitely have took a hit and almost always resulting to delayed supplier payments as a consequence. So given the scenario, it really is a challenge now to access cheap capital since startups are almost always considered risky. And we know that most startups have short runways, and but we also know that they need this infusion to give them ample time to pivot and serve the clients in the post ECQ phase. However, for those pivoting, it would still be a challenge though to stay relevant to their customers, but at the same time, stay true to the roots of your startup and why it was founded.
Thank you very much for that, Gorby. Now, before we move on to into our discussion, we have a quick video that we'd like to share highlighting one of the technologies helping people and businesses bridge the current crisis and empowering them for a better normal. So let's play that video now.
Welcome to a world made more convenient with GCash. Shop and dine easily with GCash QR, send money to family and friends, make withdrawals with GCash MasterCard, pay your monthly bills, and transfer to over 30 banks, all with one app. It doesn't stop there. We've got something for your business too. GCash for Business, a fast and flexible platform where clients can disburse funds easily with no setup fees. Our simplified workflow enables clients to open a corporate wallet, then securely disburse funds to employees. When you sign up to GCash for Business, you enjoy a bunch of other benefits that go beyond what others have to offer. There's no maintaining balance to worry about. In other words, zero maintaining balance for you and your employees. It's accessible 24/7 through a web-based platform. You can manage everything, plus you can customize it to your needs. Account activation for your employees is quick and easy. All you need is one valid ID and a few minutes to fill up a form on the GCash app. Reports are made available whenever you need them, and your employees will receive an SMS notification once they receive their funds and whenever they transact using GCash. And on top of that, they can access all GCash features right at their fingertips. Setting this up for your business is simple. Your HR officer consolidates all employee information, IDs, and signatures into the system. Your finance officer then uses this information to disburse properly to each employee, so that all your employees have to do is wait for the SMS notification and they can use their pay as they please. Easy, right? Experience the convenience of going cashless with GCash for Business.
All right, so now that our panelists have shared some preliminary insights, let's kick off today's conversation by exploring some of the success stories we see across industries besieged by COVID-19. I want to direct this first question to the man behind one such success story. Roland, your platform, Kumu, has become an indispensable tool for many Filipinos and Filipino businesses looking to bridge the chasm of quarantine. Could you share some insights on how that came about, and what were some of the conversations happening over at Kumu HQ when the pandemic first broke out? How did you respond?
Yeah, I think so. One of the, can you guys hear me clearly? So, one of the key things that for us as a mobile app is really prior to COVID, the whole concept of Kumu was really about building and scaling authentic connections, because we did notice a rapid spike in things like boredom, things like loneliness, or what's really worse is a combination of both boredom and loneliness that occur with global Filipinos around the world. And so I guess when COVID struck, a lot of those key core behaviors, we saw a significant spike where, we became, I think we were closing close to I think right when COVID hit, it was about 500,000 downloads a month, now closer to about 1 million downloads a month. And one of the biggest things that we really needed to do was take a step back and start reassessing and just making sure that we did, because we just finalized a Series A round. So, 3 significant business families had just invested in Kumu, and one of the most influential Singapore venture capital firms had just invested in our Series A financing. And one of the key things that we had to make sure was really taking a look at profitable unit economics, and also just making sure that we were keeping costs in line. And so since then, I think as we started taking a look at a lot of the key companies, very, very quickly, we were able to see who would be able to execute greatly in this new environment. And then unfortunately, with some other older businesses that weren't prepared, very quickly over the last 2 or 3 months, we've noticed that their business has been significantly hit. So yeah.
You guys at Kumu did a lot as well to directly support businesses. I remember you sending out these calls for, I remember you guys for sending out these calls for like a hotline almost for businesses to call in and say, how can we use Kumu on your platform? So
Yeah, Tiago, that's exactly it. So for example, with Team Manila, one of the things that we did was really look for brands who are getting impacted. So we talked to like Team Manila, Zark's Burgers, Lay Bear, and those types of things. And we were launching live streamings and being able to sell products. I mean, even with Future Fresh, we were selling sustainably grown vegetables. People were actually ordering from our app, and then we were able to, forge partnerships with like, Ninja Van. And that's where you started seeing who was ready and who wasn't ready. For those who weren't ready, we had to actually spend more time coding and making sure. But when you looked at companies like PayMongo and Great Deals, Steve C's business, they were very ready. And you're starting to see that both of those businesses actually doing very well during the crisis, while the ones that we actually had to spend extra time building technology to make it work for them, unfortunately, they've been impacted.
Yeah, right. So you did your own kind of market research as well, just by opening yourselves up to supporting other businesses. So Kumu is a prime example of how technologies can serve as a bridge, not only among teams but connecting entire communities. I'd love if we could explore another example. So this next question is for Mr. Dimalanta, Gorby. Can you tell us a little bit about what efforts you've made over at Bukid Fresh to respond to the pandemic? How are you able to continue operating through the crisis and continue servicing your communities of both farmers and consumers?
It was actually initially a logistical problem. It wasn't really much of a marketing problem. When the ECQ was enforced, people were buying from us in droves, and we actually had difficulty handling the website traffic. But yeah, I think the problem with us, I think in the first 2 or 3 weeks, was actually on logistics, because people weren't still, and the government wasn't sure on how to enforce the ECQ policies, and we even had problems transporting produce from the farms to Metro Manila when it was already mentioned that it should be given a free pass. So yeah, I think in terms of handling our customers, we've been good. We've been able to serve them, and our sales actually grew to about a minimum of times 4 to 5 during the past the first 2 months of ECQ. And now, given that a lot of people are already coming in, we're seeing some plateauing in our sales already. But yeah, it's expected, because everyone is pivoting. All of these startups are pivoting to agri and food deliveries.
Yeah, and it's not just the startups. There are a lot of just organic entrepreneurial ventures cropping up in Viber groups. I see all these like villages that are doing like food sharing initiatives. So these technologies, I mean, it's not just AI or it's not just cloud, but something as simple as like social messaging platforms serve as game changers. No, it's all just about digital adoption. Just on that note, I'd like to take a step back and frame this pandemic and the innovations it's spurring in a more maybe historical perspective. No, so this next question is for Mr. Doromal Lope. Some of the most profound technological leaps in history were embraced out of necessity, right? So in response to one crisis or another. Could you share with us your insights on who is going to come out of this crisis on top?
Okay. So again, as you mentioned, right, crisis is probably a big driver for innovation over history, right? So in terms of coming out stronger out of this crisis, IBM actually came out with a position paper that says organizations should look at 6 key initiatives to help them become stronger as they come out of this current situation, right? And this applies not only for large organizations, but for startups as well, right? So number 1 is, of course, empowering a remote workforce, right? The government has been talking for a long time about allowing people to work from home, as a key solution to solving a lot of problems in Metro Manila, right? Traffic being top of that list, right? But again, the adoption of that technology, of that process has been quite slow. But if you think about it now, the genie is out of the box, right? Everyone has tried out work from home. And for a lot of people, they've probably seen the benefits and of course some of the disadvantages of that as well. But a lot of organizations are now talking to us about how do we institutionalize this nowadays? Even when we go back to whatever the new normal is going to be, how do we start allowing more people to work from home as an option, right? The other one, of course, is engaging customers virtually. And again, we see a lot of businesses in the past 3 months who've never sold things online, just all of a sudden adopt, right? As you mentioned, they're not even using a formal e-commerce platform. They're just using social media and leveraging on our courier services to sell things and deliver things online, right? Remote access to everything. Again, in the past, organizations have always felt that, we need we need to build walls in order to secure our assets, right? But again, this experience has shown that if you build these walls and yet you do not allow people to come in from the outside, then even your employees, even the trusted people in your organization will not be able to come in. So how do you allow this perfect mix of security and convenience within your organization, right? The fourth one is accelerating agility and efficiency, right? Again, costs. A lot of our panelists talk about costs and cash and funding and so on, right? How do you address this situation? How do you relook at your cost structure to become more resilient, to become more adaptable to the current situation? Cybersecurity, we've seen significant cybersecurity threats leveraging around COVID-19. So every organization should be aware in terms of how to protect their assets and educate their employees around this. And then lastly, of course, reducing operational costs and enhancing supply chain continuity. I think the good news here is with the current state of technology around cloud, with all of these courier services now available, a lot of these concerns have become simpler nowadays.
So you touched on cloud at the end there. I was wondering, you outlined the main concerns for businesses right now, but are there specific technologies or even business models and practices that have allowed some firms to flourish while others fizzle out during the pandemic?
Well, again, I think it's really how quickly the organizations were able to use the existing technologies to adapt to the current situation, right? So, for example, it was mentioned that all of these video conferencing platforms like WebEx, like Microsoft Teams, like Zoom, and so on. I'm sure a lot of organizations out there have probably not used these platforms or have used this very little in the past, right? But we've quickly seen how organizations, even schools, quickly pivot and take advantage of these technologies, right? Even in IBM, right, we have been doing remote work. We've been allowing employees to work from home since 1999, 2000, right? But I think it's the fact that in the recent years, we've also done a major pivot in terms of moving a lot of our systems into the cloud that has made our transition in the current situation easier. If all of our systems are still internal, then it would have been a lot difficult for our employees to access them in the current situation.
Fantastic insights. Yeah. Mr. David, same question. You've advised SMEs across the globe for most of your career, right, helping guide their digital transformations. Before the stream started, we were talking about your recent nationwide tour where you met with a number of businesses across the country. Now, many of the innovative companies fighting through the current crisis were already digitally enabled, able to work flexibly, operating digitally, well before the onset of the pandemic. In your opinion, what business processes, systems, or structures have allowed these firms to more quickly adapt to the COVID-19 response?
Okay, well, that's an excellent question. I think so. Funny, what types of processes or technologies would really work best? But I think it'll start first with mindset, and I think with talking to multiple SMEs around the countries and even across the different markets, we've always found that it's not really the companies with the largest budgets to spend who really do phenomenally well. I think it's those with the mindset to really accept changes and to say, hey, we got to do this, no? And when you start looking at the action steps that the company takes to achieve that, then the processes follow, then the technology follows, then the people also follow. No, having the right set of people on board, the right skills on board is equally important. It's funny because during this pandemic, there were a lot of demand from, let's say, face masks, or people want to make sure that their immune systems are high. They have to get their medicine, parang properly collected and all these things. And I was monitoring, let's say, the healthcare sector. I was looking at Mercury, Generica, Rose Pharmacy, and you could see that their online volumes all went up during these times. No, but what if you compare all of these companies in relation to Watson's? My goodness, people were like this volume, but Watson's was like way more tremendous, and it's because Watson's had embarked on these things way ahead of everyone else. No, and again, this was driven by a mindset change, and everything else followed. No, so I think when you take a look at other sectors, so if you take a look at the opportunities that will arise, no, I think having this mindset change will be the first thing that will really drive all these other aspects. To be honest, when we say that people are now more into e-commerce because the customers are there, I took note of the rise of what do you call visitors and people installing, or let's say getting subscriptions of Shopify, WooCommerce, Magento. I've seen more people use Paymaya, Gcash. I've seen an increase of Paymongo, Paylink, PayPal Me, and of course a huge, larger surge on Lazada and Shopee on both platforms. And again, we have both the customers and the businesses who shifted. And again, this started off with a mindset change. So that's I think whenever we look at winning in the market, it's a function of people, process, and technology working all hand in hand. But that is focused with mindset at the core.
Do Mika's insights resonate with your experiences, Roland, Gorby? What lessons and best practices have you picked up operating through the pandemic that you feel other businesses could benefit from? Any advice for fellow founders?
I think one of the most important things is really making sure that you're actually looking at the data, because what Miko's exactly saying is that there might be a tremendous increase in visitor volume to, say, Shopee and Lazada, but if you're actually looking at like we noticed also with our SKUs for our live stream e-commerce platform, is that you did see dramatic drops though in things that were like not essential. Or for example, why we actually had to scale our business with folks like Great Deals was really, oh wow, there's actually a lot of demand for it. This is so weird. So for example, like with Potato Quarter, people are ordering French fries, and you start seeing that, wow, food and cosmetics and things like that went up. Our partnership with Huawei and other phone went up, but then other types of gadgets dramatically decreased. And so you really need to take a look at the data and be able to prepare so that when you are making those orders, you're not finding yourself in a situation where you're making expensive purchases and end up losing a lot of revenue that way. But yeah, so I would definitely say that folks with a data-driven philosophy and a data-driven culture are really geared towards a lot of success during this time.
Okay. For me, it was really mostly about listening to the customers. Whereas for us, we operated before, like we do had a once a week delivery, but we had to ramp it up to twice a week because people were already demanding so much, and our farmers also needed to have some kind of leeway for us to order from them. And building on what Roland has said, it was really about checking the data and knowing how fast we move goods, especially for us, we're in the perishables industry. We operate on a pre-selling basis, so we were able to mitigate some losses. It was very minimal, but yeah, we really needed to check the data for us to inform our farmers that this is what the market demands now. And interestingly, though, like the demand for lettuce greens, for those SKUs that are normally bought by institutional buyers, the hotels, the HoReCa industry went down because, of course, they weren't operating, and people, I think, were especially for salad greens, people weren't buying it because They were afraid that it might get contaminated by the virus when they eat it. So most of the veggies or the SKUs that got bought out in this period was, I think, what you would call the cooking veggies or pinakbet or veggies, which was the main driver for volume the past few months.
Yeah, actually, Gorby's actually super correct. So from a data perspective, you can get a lot of quantitative analysis, but then you really need to do that qualitative follow-up where you do recognize this particular trend, and then you actually pick up the phone and talk to the customer, or in our case, a user or a community member, to understand why. And when you give your product enough room to let the community build the product, that's when you start seeing a lot more engagement. So yes, so it's data-driven, but then at the same time, when you do notice those trends, you have to do that qualitative follow-up to pick up the phone and actually talk to the user or the community person to find out what is exactly going on. So yeah, Gorby's absolutely correct. Yeah, I agree.
So and this is a question for everyone in the panel. So for companies like Kumu or for Book and Fresh, which are digital platforms, that data-driven mentality was baked in from the start, I'm sure. But for companies who maybe did not start off with that data-driven philosophy, how can they adopt one now?
Let me start, since we work with companies which are not always very data-driven. No? I think there's a few ways to look at it. Number one, the companies which are not necessarily data-driven, they actually have a lot of data internally. It's just that they have never been integrated, they've never been analyzed, or let's say the use cases for what they have. You'd be surprised. Apparently, for one project we worked on, the output of one department is the perfect input of another department. It's just that if they knew that they could connect these two dots together, they could have saved up 30% of costs. No, and the other part is to also look at the changes of customer behavior. Again, sometimes some companies are better equipped to serve that demand. No, because they have the existing resources, they have the supply, they have the I would say the brand recognition, or if you are a smaller player, there are these things that you can just leverage just because now the customers are there. I found it particularly interesting when all these Viber communities and Facebook groups started to show up. So when that happened, we started to collect every single person who was on these different groups. Because my question was, how many groups is there per person on each platform? Secondly, are they going to stay here? Are the people going to keep staying here over time? Because if this becomes like a very, I would say, formidable infrastructure, to reach people, to sell goods, then to develop a strategy in relation to this would be very important. So I think when we take a look at companies which are not, let's say, as data-driven, I think the next step here would be, okay, what are the opportunities available? And secondly, what are the things that we can work with? So to be honest, I was telling this to some companies last quarter. There's a trend that is rising, but it's not too late. And for those who got on that bus, they're performing pretty well now. Right now, it's still not too late. There are people who went back to zero. Some things were on a reset button for other industries. Others, it's like they slowed down. So it's not too late to get on the bus, I would say. So it's pretty, I would say, for other companies not exactly data-driven, there's a chance to do it now. And I think that's a very optimistic view of how to look forward in the next few months.
Optimistic but grounded, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Agree.
One insight that I've got. No,
go ahead, Roland. Go ahead. I'll follow.
Okay, so one of my investors, Liza. So in addition to her being the owner of Summit Media, she's actually the head of the digital transformation office for JG Summit. And one of the things is, I don't know, it's super cool. Like they were our earliest believer. And, I do love going into the digital transformation office, doing growth hacking seminars for Robinson's Bank and those types of things. And I think one of the biggest things for a traditional business as old as, say, GG Summit is this whole concept of really forming a digital transformation office and recognizing the specific silos and the type of data or the type of collaboration that could occur. Because you could imagine the amount of customers that you have with Cebu Pacific and the amount of customers who use Robinson's Retail to people who buy chippy chips, and really getting away from that silo thinking and being a lot more collaborative and understanding how all those pieces work together. So for traditional businesses, it doesn't have to be like a big formal digital transformation office like what they do, but for them, I think it would be absolutely necessary to have such an office to be able to have an initiative for digital first policies. But definitely, how, like, for example, for a lot of tech companies, you actually have to have like a digital privacy officer. I definitely highly recommend having more of like a digital transformation officer to actually consult with folks like Miko to hire them to come in and really help, or those types of things, because that's something that I've seen that's been very effective working with some conglomerates.
Actually,
Lope,
I find
you had something to
JD
add? Oh,
quite
sorry, Miko, go ahead.
No, just very quickly. I think for everyone's context, JD Summit has a multitude of different companies in different sectors. And you have companies which are very advanced technologically. Cebu Pacific would be a perfect example of that. Then you have other companies which are, the sector is a bit more slower. You don't have this use of all this digital marketing from the onset. But the great thing is that each entity has a lot of information, again, the office that they're running, they're working on baby steps, getting everyone aligned to the same things, working on small projects, and it's like assembling the Avengers. You get something first, and then as you build on it later. You now have a team that runs more smoothly, and the JD Sun Group is something I've been actually monitoring over time. It's an exciting thing for me to always check, because we know that this initiative has been going on for a while, and we check, are there changes in what do you call talent which joined the company? Are there changes of technology that they started to implement? And that will really disrupt a lot of things moving forward. So I just had to make a comment, because it's one of my favorite things to monitor.
Yeah, the media industry is transforming every day. Kumu is a testament to that. Lope, do you have any insights, maybe from other industries as well?
Yeah, well, maybe just a quick comment around all of this database decision making, right? Data-driven decision making. I think, to paraphrase also what Miko said earlier, everything has to start with the opinion and the strategy, right? We had a term a few years ago where we said we have to take the hippo out of the decision making, right? Hippo meaning highest paid person's opinion, right? So decision making has to be data driven, right? But what I would just like to add is, I think, again, this current situation sort of levels the playing field, right? Whether you're new in this area or you've been an organization who's been doing this for some time, a lot of the models and the assumptions that we've made in the past are probably not going to be valid anymore for the rest of the year, and maybe for the next few years even, right? So it's not too late to start now for a lot of organizations. If they're not doing it yet, this is the perfect time to do it. And there's a lot of tools available today, on the cloud, very easy to use. You don't need a data scientist. You just need to get the data together, upload it, and let these tools come up with the proper analysis to give you insights.
Yeah. Gorby, any advice for non-digitally empowered firms to take on a digital or a data-first philosophy?
For me, probably it's just practical solutions, like what Mr. Locke has said. We really don't need a very modern technology, but rather we can use whatever is in the cloud and remove the use of pen and paper, because it would require manual encoding into the system, right? So I think for me, it's really to shift to a more digital economy. You just need to get more information from our customers, and that information should be customers should be able to input it in the company's database, whether that is as basic as Google Sheet or whatever the tool that can be uploaded in the cloud.
I have a question here from the audience. This is directed towards everyone on the panel. For those interested to start their own businesses, even in this time of pandemic, as a means to survive, are there specific industries that you panelists can recommend?
Wow. Okay. I have some immediate chismis, no? So I looked at the top 3 things that people are doing in terms of what do you call it? In terms of increased usage during the pandemic. So health and exercise and fitness is top, no? And interestingly, it's the Gen Z and millennials who are driving that change. That's number 1. The second thing is actually e-commerce still, no? A lot more people are still buying online. In fact, it's to the charts. No, I was monitoring the baseline levels of both Lazada and Shopee, and the daily volumes are interesting. And that's driven by the Gen Xers. Another sector which I would probably have a look at would be I think food. It's still pretty interesting. We're seeing that there's a large consumption for food delivery apps, no? And according to I'm trying to remember, as of May 29, no, they're essentially saying that they will continue to use food delivery apps, whether it's Food Panda or Grab Food or Lala Food, no. So those things are rising. So if people are starting, no, but again, I would say this with a slight caveat, no. People started, they're getting traction. People have choices because they're now all online. But at a certain point, this will get more and more saturated. But offhand, the demand for exercise and fitness is just amazing. E-commerce, it's still going to rise, and food, still some room to grow. So those are the 3 things. This one I specifically saw. Yeah.
Fantastic. Any other insights from the panel?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, again, we're just a digital platform. And one thing I always talk about is this Andrew Chen. He wrote an article called The Passion Economy. And, a lot of times for, say, a creator, a content creator, you need to generate millions of views or hundreds of thousands of likes to earn an income as a creator. But what we learned through Passion Economy is really just gain the attention span of just a couple hundred people who believe in your passion. And so, yes, we did have the natural, through our microtransactions, which is the equivalent of someone who plays the guitar, like in BGC High Street or Eastwood, and then you throw coins into their guitar case. So that is, yeah, like a busking, digital busking. So that has gone up. We have about 240 people who earn full-time. But also, here's the cool thing, 6,000 to 7,000 people who earn part-time incomes doing that on the app every month. And what we've noticed is very similar to what Miko said, is it's not busking. It's wellness, health, financial coaching, yoga, exercise. Our base is basically all Gen Z and millennial. And so specifically for food, like we're working with Mercato Central and working on shows where we could incubate people with food businesses, where people can actually go in their kitchen, prepare the food, but we'll already have the SKUs ready, and then we'll go ahead and deliver them out utilizing our e-commerce platform. So I think that the number one thing is just really focusing on this whole idea of a passion economy and really focusing that, hey, if you just capture the attention span of a couple hundred people, we have users on the app who spend, upwards to, I think on the high end, $20,000 a month, but on average about $50 a month. That when you distribute that to our content creators, we have some people, I know one particular user in the province, she just made 500,000 pesos in income last month just because of all these busking gifts that she's receiving from Filipino users in the US, Canada, specifically Middle East, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, who definitely have the discretionary income to support these creators. But yeah, it's definitely been really interesting to witness and look at the data and see all the different types of businesses that you could start on the platform because they are just passionate about something that caught the attention span of just a couple hundred people. You don't need thousands of likes or hundreds of thousands of views. So yeah.
That story, that user story you shared, stands in really stark contrast to like another story that I came across talking to one of the angel investors from a prominent angel investor network in the Philippines. Was saying that that one of the startups they invested in went from an annualized revenue of about $1 million to zero almost overnight. It's a shocking drop, right? Not to bring it, I'm going to take a page out of Miko's book. I'm going to be optimistic about this, but it's a pretty doom and gloom, as you mentioned, figure. And so yeah, I'm going to use this as a segue to a question, another question coming from an Ia Santos Valen from our audience. What are your thoughts regarding taxation of new small online businesses? Right. I think that you have all these entrepreneurial ventures cropping up, these organic and grassroots initiatives. What are your thoughts on the government looking to tax them now?
Well, let me say something. I know who asked that question. Hi, Ia. How are you? Well, let me just tell you my personal opinion. No? It's not very popular. I think people are trying to come into terms, and that's why they've decided to do a lot of sideline or online businesses just to augment the income. No, I did read someplace that they are clarifying what they mean by online taxation. But for me, kasi I've always found that sometimes government policies, sometimes the way that we decide to tax is not always clear with online. This was the case with e-commerce when it started out. No, we have different regulations per country. And for me, if they're gonna put some rule behind this, then it has to be very fair. And secondly, it's not supposed to milk out of the situation. No. I found it particularly strange that they decide to raise this now when people are trying to come to terms. Maybe after this thing is over, no, that would be much better. But again, how they do that, and I think factoring in all the considerations, I don't think that I have yet to see what they have to say about that, no, because there's so many nuances with online transactions. There are coupons which are availed of services, and like once you avail of that from the store, what happens? You get taxed double, no? So for me, I would prefer that if they decide to do this, please choose another date. That's number one. Number two, well, I hope that it's hyper clear in terms of regulations, because right now we have heard it, but we haven't seen any details in specific. No? So that's just my quick opinion, Ia.
For me, sorry.
Go ahead, Gorby. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
for me, just to jump on what Miko has said, I think we have to be more clear. We're not sure what online business means. Like for us, we have a website that's online, but how about those selling like via Viber groups and Facebook groups? Are they considered online as well? And I think we also have to put a threshold, like what's going to be the minimum income before we tax these online businesses. And yeah, people are doing this to augment their income right now. And I think my personal opinion is we have to study first. And although I understand that I think the government needs money also to for us to do the mass testing and everything else. But yeah, I think in terms of implementation, it will still be a long way before we're able to iron out the exact regulations for this law.
Just to pick up really quickly from there, Gorby, we've been talking about the need for a data-driven approach to doing business today. But for those who are precisely, doing maybe smaller ventures, more grassroots ventures, who don't have the infrastructure to collect all of this data or to analyze this data, the infrastructure, the expertise, what sources can they look to get these insights? Maybe Lope, if you have any insights there, as our expert in data infrastructure.
So sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, for the businesses who may not have the infrastructure or the expertise to pull in the data that they need to then analyze and turn into insights, what sources can they look to find that information?
Well, I think as Miko mentioned earlier, a lot of organizations have this data intrinsically inside them, right? The challenge, I think, is that for a lot of organizations, this data may not be in digital form, right? A lot of them may be in paper, right? But I would assume nowadays, most organizations would probably use at least a spreadsheet, right? So even if this data, for example, are in spreadsheets, the second challenge may be that these data are in different locations, right? They may be in, people's laptops, right? They may be owned by different departments, and they're not integrated yet across the whole organization. But again, if you look at the technology available today, especially available on the cloud, which everyone can access very easily, there's a lot of technology available today that will allow you to take these different types of data, different sources of data, integrate them into a single platform, and then generate insight from that platform, right? So I think it's really just a matter of attitude that organizations want to do it. They want to spend some time learning maybe some new skills to be able to leverage on that. And then, I'm sure they are able to get the value out of that data. It's almost an imperative nowadays that organizations do that to be successful.
Yeah, Miko.
So I have three practical tips for people who want to look for information. No? Number one, remember that we have so many webinars happening right now. So what I would always recommend people to do is have a roadmap, or like, a collection map of different learning, what do you call, institutions. No, so if you're in the food sector, there are multiple discussions happening in the US, in Europe, in the Philippines, in Singapore, diba, where they talk about the food sector. So you may not have access to the information, but the speakers in this, they might be talking about it. That's one. The second thing is that there's also a lot of resources coming out online in relation to COVID-19 and changes of behavior. No, if you take a look at the market research firms like Nielsen, Kantar, TNS, they have been releasing a lot of reports with regard to changes of consumption. No? And the last place I would also take a look at would be both Facebook and Google. If you ever have your own platform for running ads on Facebook and Google, they have this COVID-19 resource center. Think with Google or Facebook IQ are two resources where they have been churning out a lot of information to help businesses or SMEs to thrive better. And they talk about what are the changes of habits that are happening. So those are three areas that won't cost you money, but it'll cost you some time to really just organize yourselves and to collect it. Because sometimes we belong to sectors which are not exactly, it's very niche or it's not very consumer facing, right? But again, if you try to create a basket size of different companies or resources that can help augment the gaps that you have with regard to data, then this is how you'd be able to do it. No, so I always believe there's things that you could do from a shoestring budget, and if you have a little bit more budget, that you get a little bit more things as well. But offhand, those three places are where I would go, and I would advise people to have a look at.
So Miko, those are really good insights, no? And everyone else on the panel, we've touched a number of times on interesting consumer insights that we can actually turn into a strategy. This next question, last question from the audience, comes from Maria Laginaldo. What is one important consumer insight that you've observed across industries during this more digital, let's just call it a digital time?
Well, maybe let me just put in my opinion quickly. I think one trend definitely that we've seen in these times, and I think hopefully we can also carry moving forward, is the acceptance of most people to do cashless payments, right? Electronic payments. I think, if more and more people adopt this, I think it bodes well for our economy. It bodes well for our banking system. It bodes well for a lot of things, even beyond the pandemic.
Gorby, you had an insight to share?
I think for my insight, for our team's observation, we've seen that consumers now are more. I think they want to conserve more of their money, and what they do is they buy from one shop, and that one shop will deliver everything to them, so that only has one shipping fee for them. I think that's what they call pasabay in the social media. So I think for them to buy more.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also echo that. One of the biggest things is really a more especially since our app is really built on authentic connections, the biggest consumer insight we've seen is a more community-driven approach to commerce that is very fascinating. So, for example, yeah, Shopee and Lazada do live streaming and they do e-commerce, but what we've noticed through Kumu is, they call themselves families, tribes, nations, tropangs, squads, and those types of things. And we're starting to see a lot of consumer behavior about really how do we come together as a family or as a community to engage and support each other through e-commerce or through microtransactions. And because of that, it's really forced the product team to start thinking about how to do community-driven experiences for commerce. So, for example, okay, if we get to 200 orders, the price will drop by 20%. If we go to 1,000 orders, the price will drop by 40%. Those types of things, and a lot of that is actually driven through community, and it's been very interesting to see that key insight because there's always that need for people to come together. So yeah,
that is fascinating, right?
I think I'll have one last comment now.
Yes.
It's funny now because we talk about consumer insights across industries. So it's not just across industries, but across markets. I decided to take a look at what was happening in Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore, the Philippines. No? And if you compare sector by sector, even though you pit the small player against the incumbent large players, not everyone is communicating to the public what they should be communicating with regard to selling a product or addressing a need, all these things. So I think it's always good to always monitor different companies that you're trying to compare yourself against, and to see whether are they doing this or not? Because apparently you could be first in delivering the service, or you could actually learn from them what they're doing correctly. And I think it's really the companies that are taking this proactive step that are really winning, in my perspective. Right now, I can tell you out of 20 banks I'm monitoring in 4 markets, only 3 are running ads. So, and the ads that they're running, they're gaining market share. So things like that, no. And in your own small business category, have a look. Take a look at how they're promoting. Are they active? Are they doing something well or not? No, and that would really help a lot of business owners to really recover much faster because there's demand. There's really demand. It's just that it's not always being met. So just have a look.
So one final question for everyone on the panel, just to wrap up today's session. What recent development in the local business community has you most excited about the future of Filipino innovation? It's a bit of a Miss Universe question. Mr. Doramal.
Okay, I probably have to think a bit more about it, right? I think in general, it's just this community, this Bayanihan spirit, this community that has been forged together because of this crisis, right? I think we're seeing, platforms being built on the fly, as you mentioned, the social media platforms where communities are getting together, where people now find new markets for them to sell products and services. In general, I think it's the infusion of all of these new digital technologies across the whole spectrum of society, right? Young or old, people are now embracing technology as something that they can actually use and they can actually make business out of, or they can use in their business rather.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so excited about collaborating with Digital First and really the startup community. I think that's one thing, we've been utilizing, I've been using the hashtag in this together a lot when exploring these partnerships. So again, like whether it's working with Mercato Central or Team Manila to, Pay Mongo or Great Deals, I think there's just kind of general sense of community, of people coming together to help each other during this crisis. And I'm just really excited. For example, Gcash has been a great partner. Kickstart is also an investor in Kumu, and they're constantly sending us introductions to other enterprises for us to explore. And it feels a lot different than, this is a business deal, whatever. There's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of community. There's a sense of, hey, let's do this because this is our time to actually shine. And if we can do this together and survive, we'll actually end up becoming stronger than ever before. And so that's why I'm very, very excited about it.
It does seem like a time of purpose-driven innovation. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I think during the past 3 months, we've seen some very new things pop up, and I think even myself, when we make online orders that did not, for products that were not in my radar at all. No, I remember like 2 weeks ago, I had like the best cookies of my life, and it is not in any normal channels which I was exposed to. So I think having these new products come out and new categories pop up, it's really going to increase competition, but not just competition, but in a very healthy way. It'll be better for customers in the future. So I think if this continues on and people find new opportunities to bridge the gap, or for example to meet the demand, I think it'll be a very exciting time for all of us. Things are becoming easier. I remember for GCash, they started to increase transaction thresholds. So that's amazing for people, because now they can do more with the platform. So I look forward to this a lot. So let's see. We can always do a catch up after, and I'll tell you the new things that I've tried. So things like that.
Would love that.
Okay, for me, what has been particularly interesting these times is that we've seen countless collaborations between startups and the public sector in solving some of the main challenges caused by the pandemic. Like specific to agri-food and health industries, we've seen more of the tech startups pivot and user expertise for these sectors to improve and to ultimately better serve the Filipino people. So that being said, I would like to see this happen more often in the future, as startups would be able to see the government as another means to scale rather than just a regulatory body. And then, of course, secondly, given the growing digitization of most industries now, this has caused the more mature market segment to adapt and transact their business online. It's worth noting that this market segment has the higher disposable income, and so this development really works in favor of the startups, as it lessens the friction in converting these potential customers. So that means that there's now greater need for digital skills, regardless of industry or age. And then lastly, as the market now becomes more saturated, serving the essential needs, companies will have to be more efficient in their marketing spend. Although thankfully there are a lot of analytics and digital marketing tools that can easily be utilized now. And it's now up to the businesses to be creative in incentivizing their customers to extract as much as information as possible, so they'll be able to understand better their purchase patterns.
As tech journalists covering the local innovation community, we've been referring to the startup scene in the Philippines as a bayanihan ecosystem for a few years now. And I think that's never been more apparent than now during this time of COVID. Everyone on the panel, I think that's a great place to end today's session. Thank you so much, Lope Doramal, Miko David, Roland Ross, Gorby Dimalanta. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really fantastic insights. And to Miko's point, I think we should do a follow-up sometime soon after all of this, just to see where we're all at, and do a post-mortem on on this better normal we're trying to build. So thank you again as well to our series sponsor, SM Supermalls, our community partners, Idea Space Foundation, Impact Hub Manila, Kickstart Ventures, Google Innovation Hub, and Startup Village. Our e-learning platform partner, and those responsible for this slick interface you're all seeing today, OLearn. And of course, our media partners, Business World and the Philippine Star. Oh, and of course, all of you, our viewers, for joining us today. My name is Tiago Arnaiz, and this has been session 1 of the SparkUp Entrep series. Stay safe, have a great afternoon, and see you all at the next session.